amazing. She's one of my heroes. So that's in the early 80s. She co-founded the Folk on the Rocks Music Festival, bringing together musicians from far-flung communities in the Northwest Territories. And she did so to demonstrate how a racially divided community could unite around music. In the 90s, she co-founded an agricultural business on Fraser Common Farm. She's recognized as creating the first commercially grown mixed green salad in Canada. In 2006, it became a co-op, Glorious Organics. And since then, Heather has been an advocate of shared farming on shared land. She's also a founding member of FarmFolk CityFolk, which has been such a leader and inspiration to me for 30 years. She works with Young Agrarians. She works with the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian food security and many, many other things. And I will say one thing that's been amazing about having, we were able to bring Heather from BC to Ontario a couple of years ago at the EFAO conference to do something on farm co-ops. And it's part of our development of a mentoring program, and she's one of our mentors, and so we're so thrilled to be able to bring her to Ontario. And when she came to the EFAO conference a few years ago, there was, I think, one, Heart's Content was the only farm co-op that I could really point to, besides from Gay Lee and the big ones that have been around for kind of and stuff like that. Now, I was just telling Heather, partly due to her inspiration, we've got Beatbox, we've got Black River Co-op going, we've got another one in the north, we've got the Northwest Beef Co-op. So things are, from our experience, local food and farm co-ops, it's the land and farm co-ops that are growing the fastest. So we're really excited to be able to have her here again.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Okay. Make sure this is working. Yeah, and I'm excited to be in Ontario. When I knew that I was coming for the Slow Food Summit, because I chair the National Board of Slow Food, I knew that once I was here, that we could take the opportunity to also work with some of the co-ops here. And I'm on the mentorship list, so I just came from Matheson, which is just east of Timmins, with a farm there where the landowner wants to donate his land, and where the young farmers that are living on that land want to form a co-op to manage the land or take the land into trust. And so we've been having lots of phone conversations, but the opportunity to meet in person and to be on that farm for a couple of days and to meet all the people interested in making that co-op, it makes all the difference in the world. I agreed to be a mentor, even though I knew it probably was only going to be by Zoom or some other electronic, connection. But the face-to-face meetings that we've been having have been, really fantastic. And I can talk a lot more about that co-op if you have questions. I'm going to do a fairly short presentation, I think, about co-ops in BC. I've honed down this presentation to just focus in on co-ops, so it can be targeted to what you're interested in. But what I'd like to do before I start is kind of give you a little introduction around the table, because you can imagine, whenever somebody does my CV or something, it's the result of being this old, right? And having this huge, huge history. So for me to ramble on and tell you stories that are not really focused on what you're interested in hearing is just not productive. What is more productive is for me to go around, and if you can say your name and where you're from, and one thing that attracted you to come to this workshop that you might actually like to get out of it. And if I could have somebody record this on the side here, we want to go back to see, did you get your questions answered, right? Because I'm here to be a resource to you, not to be a performer. Okay, so we can start here. So great. So we have a huge diversity of people around, which is always really good. We have some young people who would like to get on land. We have people interested in co-ops. We have some people with money, which is always a fantastic thing to have around the table. We have people who are planners, belong to nonprofit organizations, people who have land and may want. I hear a theme, which is certainly something we share in British Columbia, is around housing. I'm very familiar with the housing situation in British Columbia. We'll probably look to Sally, to illuminate like what kind of challenges you have here in Ontario, and it may be parallel. You may be able to learn some of the things that we have, approaches that we've taken in British Columbia, and maybe not. Maybe we just have to form an advocacy group and just, really promote the idea that people who are our food provisioners do get to be able to live on the land. And we can have that discussion a little bit after I'm going to present here. Let's just hope the technology works for me, okay? I'm going to open it up. I have this picture somewhere in my slide presentation, but this is actually our cooperative farm. And that's what I see every time I open up my computer. It's incredibly motivating, and you can see that we have a real diversity of people. And I always like to think that when we're looking at co-ops diversity, just like we're looking at farming, where diversity really is one of the major mitigators of climate change, we're looking at diversity too. But we're not looking at diversity in terms of purpose. Like in co-ops, we're trying to find common ground, common purpose, and the diversity you want in your group are diversity of skills that people bring to it, diversity of age and backgrounds rather than that. So I'm just going to go to the slide presentation. So I always like to say in British Columbia, we always acknowledge the unceded territory that we are occupying as settlers in our relationship to land. And one of the quotes that I love, and it's at the bottom of my emails, is this one from an Ontario Anishinaabe woman who's a scholar. And so she says, within Anishinaabe thought, the opposite of dispossession is not possession. It is deep, reciprocal, consensual attachment. Indigenous bodies don't relate to land by possessing or owning it or having control over it. We relate to the land through connection. Generative, affirmative, complex, overlapping, and non-linear relationship. And I always like to think that when we're working at forming cooperatives and when we're coming together to cooperate with each other, that this relates to both land and to the people as well. And we've got the kind of diversity, and we want to be able to regenerate is the language we're using now in agriculture, because we actually can't sustain what we have. We actually have to build something from what we have, and we have to regenerate both the land and our relationships with each other. So here we are. This is a Fraser Common Farm Cooperative, an agricultural cooperative, a non-profit land cooperative in Aldergrove, BC, which is in it's in the township of Langley, very close to the American border. We purchased land 40 years ago, $70,000, 10 acres, and started our farm cooperative. And then about 18 years ago, in 2000, I guess that's 18 years ago, we purchased the land next to it, which was another $10,000 for $400,000. Now, if we were to assess that land today, it would be in the millions in the Fraser Valley, which would be unaffordable for anyone who was just trying to pay a mortgage by selling their carrots at the farmer's market. It's just, in British Columbia, it's unless you go really far out and you have family support or whatever it is, land is inaccessible. So one of the reasons co-ops become very important is because they can address that inaccessibility. This is our farm. Again, this is not land that has been drained and the trees been taken down and everything been put into straight rows and whatever it is so that we can get the tractor. We do have a little tractor on it, but we try and use it as little as possible. So you can see we've mapped it, and this is the technology I think today that's so fantastic, is you go to Google Maps and you can see and you can share how this land works. So where these are all, this is where we're growing from, all these fields. Now we are used to be an hour from Vancouver. Now we're maybe an hour and 20 because of the traffic. And this is our primary market into Vancouver. So this is not going to relate to anybody that's in rural BC or rural Ontario, but we farm on this land. It's a not-for-profit cooperative that has the ownership. It's a worker co-op that farms it. So the worker co-op that farms it has a lease agreement, or what we don't even call it, we call it working agreements with our land. The worker co-op that farms it is all resident on the land. We're lucky enough to have actually 2 properties. So because we have 2 properties, we can have a little more housing than you could have if you had 1. But we have a very strong support base other than the people who live on the land and the people who farm it. So I'm really happy to hear people say they're not really a farmer, they're here to support. Because in a good, healthy cooperative, having people who aren't farming and aren't full-time unavailable during the farming season is just, it's a very big asset. And we'll go through some of these other cooperative farms and talk about this. So these are the people from the city, mostly, that come out on the Easter weekend and sing to the chickens. And the kids, that's our kind of little, we're a bit hokey. All right, we go way back, but the kids love it because they see the chicken come running and sing back to us. So that's this relationship between farm and city, this relationship in your co-op between people on the land and people who come either there because they want some green space, they want to introduce their kids to the country or whatever it is, that's really important. And one of the things we often do on the Easter weekend, and I'm focused on this now because this is the time of year we're in, is to plant trees. So there's all kinds of ways that city folks can engage. Another way is to do the kinds of things that we know are really not economically farmable. This is building a bee condo, and we've done this in cooperation with our local young, what do you call it? The EYA, the Environmental Youth Alliance. We also have a local group, LEPS, which is the Langley Environmental Partners. So we're partnering with everybody. We're partnering with people in Vancouver who they've gotten a grant to put some bee condos on. We brought our friends out to do that. So I like to think of the cooperatives as having an advantage because the farmers don't have to do everything. And they particularly don't have to do the things that are really hard to be compensated for, really hard to sell, right? They can, in a registered cooperative, you can get grants and you can get involvement and you can have members that are community folks. And we have a number of them, and we've got pollinators all over our farm, some of them that create honey for us, but others that do the really important work of pollinating our crops. The other thing that's happens on all our community farms all over is celebration. The farms are a wonderful place to celebrate. I include this because we're just past May Day here, and we have eclectic group of people all over the place that come out, the Morris men that come out to dance, that put up the maypole, that have kind of a performance art happening all over the farm. They come out and they see places in the farm that they can reenact maybe a Greek legend or something like that. One of the really fun things that happens on our farm in the spring. And this is a free event. Everyone contributes, everyone builds the feast, everyone participates in it. And it's kind of really democratic, I think, because you can bring friends out. And they have a community that recreates this every year. Cooperating with other cooperatives. So our farm was specifically, and in terms of working for FarmFolk CityFolk, one of the projects I did before I left was to form a worker co-op, it's not a worker co-op really, it's a producer co-op. So if you know the difference, and Sally would probably tell you, when you go to form a co-op, you can either be for-profit or not. If you're a community-based cooperative, you're likely wanting to be not-for-profit. You can make lots of money, you can sell things, you can do whatever it is, but you don't return dividends to your members. Unlike a consumer co-op where I'm a member of Otter Co-op and they give me a dividend at the end of the year. With Fraser Common Farm, regardless of how much we make and what we do and maintain the land, I don't get a dividend from being a member. Then there's the worker co-op, and you're specifically setting that up because this is your livelihood. And the only people that are usually part of that worker co-op are the people that are working in it. So it's a democratic organization. So on our farm, we have both. We have the not-profit owning the land. We have the worker co-op farming it. So we've got those two. But another co-op that's really co-op model that's really happening in British Columbia, probably even faster than the worker co-op, is all of you farmers getting together and deciding you need to help each other market your product, right? Or getting together for distribution. And this producer co-op is called the BC Eco Seed Co-op. So you had all these little seed companies all over British Columbia, and we kind of pulled them together for conferences and tried to learn from each other, and decided that what we really needed was a cooperative. We started with a small number of people. People always ask me, how many should we have starting a co-op? The minimum is 3. I always say that that's not a very strong number of people. For you in Ontario.
The worker co-op is 3.
Worker co-op is 3, yeah. And I always say, try and find more than 3. Try and maybe find 5. I think we started with the Eco Seed Co-op at 7, and then we have built it up to 14. So this co-op is made of farmers who are already selling their seed in little packages and stuff like that. But the advantage of getting together is not only can they learn from each other, improve the quality and the quantity and of the seed that they produce locally, but they can bring it together and market it. And one of the things that happened when we started this co-op is that people were really reluctant to step forward and say, I want to be a member of the co-op, because they had this idea that somehow somebody out there was dictating what they should do. I don't really know if I want to become a co-op because I don't want to lose my business, right? They've got their customer base. Well, why would you lose a business? If you don't want to lose a business, your co-op doesn't require you to sell all your seeds to the co-op. So gradually we got this message across, and some of these people that belong to this co-op, like Mary Alice has had with Full Circle Seeds, has had her business going for a long time. But what she needed was to be able to trade with other co-op members bulk seed. So as farmers, they didn't want like 36 seeds in a package, right? They needed half a pound of seed. And not only did they need half a pound of seed, they wanted some honest feedback from other growers. Like if we send our seeds off to Glen Valley Organic Farmer Co-op, we know that they're going to tell us whether they works or not. If we sell our seeds to the backyard gardener, the backyard gardener isn't going to know whether it's the seed that's at fault or they're at fault, or they've kept the seed in too warm a place or whatever it is. So there are many reasons why farmers might get together and form a different kind of co-op, which is a producer co-op, a marketing co-op, a distribution co-op. And I think the more farmers we have, small scale farmers we have in British Columbia, the more that's attractive to them. We have a number of co-ops that are being built. And then I think for me, before we go off our own farm, this is Feast of Fields, which is an event that FarmFolk CityFolk holds every year, a big fundraiser event. And it started at our co-op, and now with the 50th Feast of Fields, because it's happening all over British Columbia. We've got it in Kelowna, Vancouver Island, and the Lower Mainland. This was the 50th celebration, of 50th feast that came back to our farm. And I like it because, look, we have the Seed Co-op involved in it. We have the Young Agrarians involved in it. And it's a way where we kind of pull the group together. And I think Feast of Fields is great to be. We had a Feast of Fields here, actually, and you still do probably in Ontario. That's how we got the idea. And having celebrations and fundraisers and things on the farm is a way that you have of raising money too, and raising awareness. So I would say, based on our experience, because we started our co-op 40 years ago, we got involved in buying another property, Glen Valley Organic Farm in Abbotsford, and it was kind of like the farm was up for sale. It was an organic farm. It was growing carrots for, again, I'm going to lose the names on me. I'm going to have several senior moments I want to tell you, and you can just forgive me for that. Happy Planet Juice started on this farm and with the organic farmers there. They wanted to sell it, and there was no buyer. There was lots of buyers, but there was no buyer that wanted to keep it on an organic farm. People wanted to flood it, actually, and grow cranberries, which is really popular in our area, and it has some really good boggy land for cranberries. So we pulled a group together to buy the land. It was $400,000. We needed to have, I think it was $500,000 when I think about it. We needed to have at $5,000 shares, which was kind of the most we could charge for a share without getting into a secondary round of regulations. We needed to sell that many shares in order to be able to purchase this land. Well, our co-op and everybody we knew sold a lot of shares. In the end, what happened is when we were able to raise maybe half or 2/3 of the money, we had our credit union come in and mortgage it for the rest. So we have developed pretty friendly relationships with particularly the Van City Credit Union. We always say in Quebec they've got the government, and in British Columbia they've got the credit union, right? Because they actually fund millions of dollars to different food security projects. And they came in and closed the gap on the sale by mortgaging the land. And some people say, well, why would somebody pay $5,000 share in it? They don't want to live there. They don't want to farm there. It was all of these people who really wanted to protect that land and have some kind of ownership and connection and engagement with the land. And it was hard work, but the model that they do that I use a lot is that they did the kind of model that was kind of like work together, eat together, meet together. So every month they'd have this big kind of come out and have a tour and do a work party and bring some food so we can share it. And then after that, if you're still interested in it, we'll hold our meeting at the end of it.
Is this the same model then as a not-for-profit
Yeah.
landowners and then a worker?
Okay, good question. And interrupt me because I love that way of being able to interact with you. Yeah. So Glen Valley is slightly different. It's a not-for-profit or community service co-op, we call them in BC, that own the land. And then the land is leased out to individual businesses and individual farmers. The farmers themselves do a lot of soft cooperating, right? They'll all go maybe to the farmer's market in the same truck or something like that. And actually, our farm is the only one so far that I've been working with that has that model of the not-for-profit and the worker co-op. Most of the farms, the not-for-profit cooperative manages the land, but individual farmers and individual farm businesses lease it from the co-op. In all cases, those individual farmers and lessees actually have membership in the cooperative. So it's kind of like, we overlap. So it's not a us and them relationship. If I live on the land and I have a farm business on the land, I'm part of the ownership of the cooperative as well. Yeah.
So on your co-op, does the workers co-op lease the land from the
Yes.
co-op?
Yes. And that's part of the revenue that comes into the land co-op. The land co-op can count on the revenue from housing, the revenue from leases and whatever, because the land co-op that's there permanently is responsible for the infrastructure. We can get into lots of details, and I don't want to go too far down, but I can answer questions directly.
Are they long-term leases?
They are very long-term leases.
And how long?
They're leases that are really in practical sense in perpetuity. In British Columbia, you can have 29-year leases without going into a different categorization. So the 29-year leases would be rolled over when it comes close to the 29-year lease being available. And mostly to also have check-ins with each other. On our co-op, we redo the lease about every 5 years, just to make sure it's current and everything is happening and going well. I keep this in because this is not a new picture of Glen Valley Cooperative. I keep it in because it illustrates for me so well the advantage of co-ops in terms of succession. Because what you have here is you have Allison went with her boyfriend and bought land in Nova Scotia. Land in Nova Scotia is totally affordable, and took her goats with her. And following close behind, we found other people also going. And John was of an age where he wanted to retire. So when John retired, he basically, the new people that came in, this young family here, they came in and they said, well, he's got some perennials in there. He needs to be supported for that. He needs to be paid something for the perennials. So in the leasing the land on the co-op, they had an agreement to actually pay out one of the farmers partial of those perennials that are planted there, like rhubarb, for example. He got some money for that rhubarb, the sales of that rhubarb, I think, for 5 years. So there are economic ways because for us to be able to benefit and for us to see some of the equity or the sweat equity we put in the land by having those kinds of agreements. In any case, the young family now are a family of 3. The kids are grown up. Many of the other people have left and new people have come. So I'm often asked to talk about succession. In a family-owned farm, succession is really, really a critical problem. In co-ops, it's not. Because if you set it up so you have a diversity of age and people coming on, it's a natural evolution. Yeah.
What about
housing? Housing, yeah, I don't have housing on this farm illustrated, but housing is usually substandard. It's often small. It's under the radar. We are in BC can have a large house and a farm manager house. So in a cooperative, we don't have a manager, but and people live together, and sometimes they put in little suites, and there's all kinds of ways. And I can talk about that too when we come to the others and how they've attached housing on it, because it's my biggest issue before I die is to change some housing regulations, right? I've got a little bit of time, but not a lot. And this is my friend Chris Bodner. This is his old school way of doing the importance of record keeping. Every co-op, I'm sure Sally would say that too. If we don't keep records, we don't know what we're doing, we don't know what's working, and we don't know what to say to you as well. So our farm has been great in keeping records. We have timesheets. We keep all the records we need to be certified organic. We can tell people what we're doing. We can tell them what we're making, what makes us a profit. Chris Bodner came to Glen Valley when he phoned me. He said he had just received his PhD in communication from Simon Fraser. He was teaching at Simon Fraser. He read Michael Pollan's book, Omnivore's Dilemma. And he phoned me up and he said, I think I'm being called to farm. What do I do? And so I jumped on it immediately. I introduced him to our senior farmer on our farm. About a month later, we heard that John was retiring and they're going to need a new farmer, and they put the call out for proposals to come. He and his wife had to put a proposal together. They had never farmed. And they won out in terms of that contract or that lease to farm this land because of their community base. They won out because some of the farmers who were great farmers, they didn't want to be part of a community. They didn't want to be part of a co-op. And what they knew is just as important as farming was how you could get along, how you could communicate. And with his PhD in communication, he was a great communicator. And his wife was a great one too as well. So I have 3 kids living on the farm, and he's teaching now part-time at Kwantlen. So people are always asking me, how do people make a living on the farm? Honestly, many people have outside jobs. Many couples, one has farms full-time, and others have outside. Our farm is one of the only farms I know where the couple actually derive their full-time living on the farm. So it's not usual, and it's not expected until you get, you've been farming for a while to be able to make that kind of money. But then we were able to afford it because the co-op has affordable housing. Not free, not necessarily super cheap, definitely more affordable than what you would pay, but all of this has to make sense economically. So your co-op can't not give the land away for free and have the housing or whatever it is. It needs to be somewhat geared on your budget and what you need in order to sustain, whether you have to pay a mortgage or renovate or keep the buildings. Another co-op that we were involved in, also supporting, was a couple of farmers that had been kind of like old hippies and had been on one farm and the other. They'd never owned, they didn't want to own land, they'd never owned any land, they'd been farming together 20, 25 years. The land they were on was going to be sold. A typical scenario, right? So this is where the community in 100 Mile House came together, formed a cooperative to purchase the land. Again, like about a $400,000 price tag. And what happened with that, and $5,000 shares. In a fairly impoverished, like a really not a wealthy area. But because these farmers had been supplying, food for a very long time to their community, the community didn't want to lose them. So Betty, who owned the land, actually made a private arrangement with the farmers, with a co-op, to purchase it from them, gave them 5 years to get enough money and enough shares in order to buy the land. When they got to be, like I think their first or second year, they weren't meeting their payments. So she extended it another year. So this was a relationship based. And they fed her lots of stuff. This is one of the young farmers, teenagers from one of the young farmers in that cooperative, showing her and feeding her. So there was, again, relationship based, and I can't really speak about that too much. Everything you're going to do, I think, is both starting with a relationship to the land is also a relationship to each other. Any agreements you have don't make any sense if you don't like each other, care each other, communicate clearly, respect each other. So that's what you work on. Communication's really, really key in terms of co-ops. So Betty sold the land. I have to say that I went to their AGM, and what happened was the last $100,000 that they owed, one of their shareholders in the co-op loaned it to them. Another mechanism for being able to financially support your co-op is that you have shareholder loans. So you don't necessarily sell more shares. You don't want to have people to have more shares than what the co-op can manage and handle. In Glen Valley, their shares are 5,000, and nobody can have more than 10 shares in the co-op by their constitution, because if they have to give that $50,000 back, it would be a bit of a hardship for the co-op. So what happened was, and the interesting thing about the $100,000 that was paid out the mortgage on that to Betty, was that the shareholder in that, the member of that co-op, was a treasurer. And he had some confidence that people would pay him back. The co-op would pay him back. And I went up to their AGM, and I noticed on their financial statements that they had managed to pay him back $22,000 that year. And in this little community where they had special roasted coffee that they sold for the co-op, and they had a table at the farmers market where everybody had come and donated all of their value-added stuff, and that got sold for the co-op. And they had the local chef who did a long table for them for free. And that money that they raised went into the cooperative. And they had workshops where the money came and went back to the co-op. So they're a really good example of somebody very rural who managed to make that happen just by the participation of their community.
I just wanted to ask you, when you take on new members of the co-op, do you sort of have a dating period?
We say we don't take on new members unless we've gone a full season with them. So, and we don't usually have that problem anyway, because we had one young man who came to us from UBC from their practical course, and he came back, about the 4th year he came back. I said, now it's time for you to be a member, right? And so it's kind of like, it's not people really wanting to be members of the co-op right away anyway. For us anyway, there's a little bit of a reluctance to take on that responsibility, as long as, we treated him like he was a co-op member. So it's maybe a bit of warning for you that maybe there needs to be a differential in terms of the benefits of being a member. Anyway, he's now a full member and fully participating in both the land co-op and the worker co-op. So, yeah, but don't know. And I've got lots of examples on how people have just fallen in love, and then and they're a member and they've made all these promises, and then, whoa, call in Heather for the conflict resolution on it, right? Did you not follow my rule and not make any commitments until the whole season? You would have known that person's not compatible. I didn't actually say that to them, because that would have been a bit mean. But anyway, they got the message, and next time around, no matter how much they liked the person and how suitable they were, they actually they went through the full season, because that's how you get to know how people work together, right? And if they're, and from the other point of view, you don't want to belong to something too prematurely. I always think it's a little bit like, co-ops are a little bit like getting married, and you want to get to know each other and maybe even live together for a while, depending upon what's appropriate in terms of the way your values. And then you formalize it. When you've already set that relationship, you say, okay, we have advantages now to formalizing and becoming a cooperative. But there's many collectives I know that have never formalized. They've never actually gone the next step and incorporated. And Sally can probably talk about the advantages of corporation too. But it's your choice, right? It's your choice on how you want to work together. And so this is, Horse Lake Community Farm Co-op. Their members are aging, and they're open to new members. And this next one I just put in for no other reason than the cute animal. I keep thinking, how am I going to justify including this picture in the slide presentation or in the PowerPoint? I don't need to. And here we get into housing. This is Craig, and let's just go back and take a look at Craig. I went too quickly on that. This is Craig, one of the farmers on that farm, and this is a larger farm than what we have in the Fraser Valley. And he decided to build a house on the farm, and so he's built, and this is just the beginning of that, he's built a pine beetle kill log house. How more perfect could that be? All of this pine beetle kill. Okay, but he's up in 100 Mile House, not in the Fraser Valley. And he's doing that probably he is doing it without a permit. And nobody's going to get after him on that. And so when we're coming to housing, which is so complex, it's very, very place-based. It's like where you live, what kind of housing, what are your regulations, can you get around them, do you have variances you can go to your municipality and get them to change it, how amenable are they to tiny houses. This is what's happening in the Fraser Valley on farmland. This is a smallish house in terms of what's happening, within walking distance from our farm. And we have monster houses going up on farmland that are basically estates. And in the one that's closest to us, we don't think anybody's even living in it. Somebody, billionaire from somewhere else around the world, has enough money to do this. Somebody said they thought there was a party there one time because there was, there were people that were parked there. But we're not sure, really. There's maybe a caretaker there. It's a huge issue in British Columbia, the housing on farmland.
It would be a great farm co-op house.
Oh my God, could you imagine, right? I think the biggest problem with it is, of course, is that if the ALR, which is our zoning regulations in BC, you might know about it, we have a zoning thing called the Agricultural Land Reserve. We've had for 40 years now. It has protected farmland to a certain extent, but it hasn't supported farming. So this land is not going to be developed, right? It's only one house. So in Richmond, where you have one house that's like anywhere from 20 to 40,000 square feet, it's like one house, like, right? So around the Fraser Valley, around the Lower Mainland in BC, municipalities are trying to restrict the amount of footage. I think Richmond now has finally passed one that says you can't build something more than 5,000 square feet, which the developers really pushed back against. And some of those places there are considered to be like boutique hotels, where people from China come and where they've kept a little bit of the blueberries and where they're advertising that you can go out and pick your own blueberries for breakfast, right? This is the kind of approach we're having. I mean, I have to stop there. You can ask me questions. Another thing that we do in terms of taking land into trust can be any size. It can be the smallest size of 5 acres to, in your case, we're working with 173 acres in Ontario here. It's huge to us, but it's all about the place. And in where we are in BC and the way the topography goes, our land base is much smaller, but also incredibly rich and productive too as well, right? And another thing that we want to consider with co-ops, and I'll get back to you, is that in each one of our cooperatives we have a shareholder space on the land. In our co-op we have a guest cabin that we really protect. The workers, even if we have workers that need accommodation, we don't put them into our guest cabin. In Glen Valley they have part of a barn. That's the shareholder space in that big barn. And in Horse Lake, they have a teepee. And they're right on the river, so they have a teepee and they have a canoe. So if you're a shareholder and you want to bring your family overnight or to picnic or whatever, there's a place for you to go. And to me, that is your sign of reaching out and actually involving your shareholders. Most people who are shareholders in these community cooperatives are there to support the cooperative. They consider it like a donation, even though as a shareholder they can get the money back if they want to. And there are ways you can set it up so you're related to some, let's say a society that's got charitable status, so people can go and donate to your co-op and get a tax receipt. And we can talk more about that if you want to know. Okay, a really good question, and I didn't know that before I started out. I thought that a land trust was a separate entity somehow legally. It's not. It's like if you want to be a land trust, it's about your function. You're taking something into trust, and particularly if it's a legacy. If you're a trustee for your aunt's estate, there are regulations you have to follow with the government. To be a land trust, you can only be either a society or a cooperative. And most land trusts, I know all the land trusts in BC are societies, registered societies. Their function is trust, is to take land into trust. But it's not a separate, application or category. So we knew that the Land Conservancy in British Columbia was the only land trust that was actually taking any farmland into trust. We had Salt Spring Land Trust that has 2 properties now that are farming properties.
I used to live on Salt Spring.
Yeah. And their land trust in the last little while has been doing quite well, and they've really done a lot of work around the 2 properties that they own. But everywhere else in BC, the 33 land trusts in British Columbia are societies that are set up in trust for conservation. So they're conservancies. So the CRA, or our Canadian Revenue Agency, understands how we put land into trust for riparian areas, for historic reasons, for grasslands. But they don't see the same thing for farmland. because they see farmland as something that private people are going to benefit from, and there's a whole struggle we're going through. And the Land Conservancy managed to get land into trust, but if anybody of you know this, we certainly do in BC, they went under. They overextended themselves, they were badly in debt, they were about to go bankrupt, and community people actually stopped them from going bankrupt by making sure that their properties were either passed on to another trust. So, so 26 of those properties that were conservancy properties actually went to the Nature Conservancy of Canada. The Nature Conservancy of Canada in turn gave $1.5 million to TLC, and then they were able to put that towards their debt. So the court said that this was okay. Anyway, there's another story. I won't go into it too deeply. But what we knew was we needed a trust for farmland. So, so what I did was put together an idea of a trust, bring it to the BC Food Systems Network gathering, and people were so upset and angry with me. I got so much pushback. I was really surprised. And that was because the foundation of the gathering was Indigenous engagement and involvement. And what they were saying to me, once again, Heather, you're ignoring an Indigenous food system. You're talking only about production agriculture and farming. And so I kind of had a very restless night that night, came back the next morning and said, what if we call it Foodlands? And then all of a sudden, it was just palatable. You know, there was hugging and crying and kissing, and it was just an amazing experience because we were looking at land not about like what we could plant and grow and sell on it. We were seeing the land in a very holistic way.
We call it sustainability.
Yeah, and it's all about, it's like, yeah, and so it was guiding us in a very different way. And so then we set up the Foodlands Cooperative. So this land trust is a cooperative. So we set up a new cooperative to be able to take land into trust. And it's provincial, it holds land in trust. And one of the primary principles and purposes here, as you see, apart from benefiting the communities of British Columbia, is recognizing, respecting, and including Indigenous food systems in the way that we think about the land. We're sorting this out. So we have what we call a life estate agreement, and this would be, in a trust, this would mean that the people living there can be there for as long as they choose or as long as they live. And when he passes away, the house will become an asset to the trust. But here's the thing with this is where relationships are important, is that Mark Haley is a member, a really active member of our cooperative. So it's not, he doesn't see the co-op as being a threat to him. He's loving it. He's loving having a community come on and all these young people. He's already very open to community events in his house. He has house concerts and stuff like that. It's just given him a new lease on life to have all this support.
He has what? He has what?
House concerts, you know, in the big house. Concerts, like people locally come together and they have a concert in his house. So it's like that's the kind of guy he is. And not all of our cooperatives actually have land based. So Growing Opportunities Cooperative, they've been farming on different pieces of land. And and currently what they're on right now is called the 5-acre farm in Harwood, and we're launching a campaign. Probably it's going to cost us $1 million to $1.5 million.
This one's in Duncan?
This one is in Nanaimo, Harwood in Nanaimo. Okay. So the history of this is that the coal mine manager many, many years ago at the beginning of the Nanaimo, history of Nanaimo, gave out or just sold very cheaply 5-acre parcels to all the people working in the coal mine. And this is the last of that. That's kind of this treasure right in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
And that people want to actually preserve it.
How many of the farms are certified organic? Any of them?
The ones we deal with are almost all.
The which?
Almost all of them are certified organic.
Okay.
The only one that isn't is Cirrus Farm, the sheep farm I was talking about, and they're talking about being certified too. And and this is also the farm where we have our seed program. I'm going to go through this quickly. I realize I'm actually elongating. This is like a 10, 15 minute presentation I have. And I've got you captive, and I'm trying to give you the information that you might be interested in terms of co-ops. And these are two members of the Seed Co-op. Jen is also the executive director of Nanaimo Food Share. She's also a primary person with the Growing Opportunities Cooperative. So we have this convergence of people who are supporting the co-ops that want to launch this campaign to buy that property and to have it managed by a co-op. And the price we think would be just over $1 million. But this isn't a small co-op group. This is one where you pull in all your resources from your community, where you ask the city to buy part of it for the riparian area and for the natural areas, and you ask the land trust to organize it. So in the meeting that we held, there was probably 60 people, and people were really keen, because this is a historic site. So there's a value in it that's beyond the land, and just to go to our fantasy of what we can do on our land, our Eco Village, which is a multi-stakeholder co-op. Anyway, this is about natural building, and you'll know about this. It's kind of like cob construction, stacked wood, you name it. The ideal would be if your municipality would be like they did for our Eco Village, change the zoning so that it's full spectrum. Then you have like what they have at our Eco Village is agriculture, permaculture, education, natural building, everything you would ever want and imagine. And we don't have many municipalities in BC that would do that, but I put it out to you that maybe you do in Ontario. And what I think, just to close off, is that my passion for cooperatives is that we are forming cooperatives on land where we actually look at from cradle to grave. We're not looking at people come in and farm for a bit and then they have to leave, when they're too old. They can stay on, participate in the co-op in whatever they want, and this is kind of a picture of me 20 years from now. So that's the presentation. It looks to me like I spent exactly an hour on it. So I'm
Thank you.